So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. It's another beautiful day in Nova Scotia. I feel like I've said that the last 4 or 5 sessions, so we're really happy that you decided to take your time this afternoon to join us inside, online, on another Coach Socialization series. So today we're really excited. We have a new topic, and this kind of came from suggestions from coaches about developing culture while keeping it fun and competitive, and then also how to discipline your athletes in a proper way in an appropriate way, I guess, within sports. So with that, we have Matt here with us, who is a talent development consultant at Soccer Nova Scotia. So he's going to be talking to us about knowing your audience and how to keep your culture fun and competitive, and then also diving into Soccer Nova Scotia's philosophy and how they get the best out of their athletes. So Matt, I'll get you to take it away from here.
Yeah, hi. Just want to echo what Kirsty said. Thanks for taking the time to listen to what's being said. It's going to be an interesting one, I think, because I'm not someone who has a mental skills or nutrition background that's easily applied to a whole bunch of varied sports. I'm very much from soccer. So when I was putting this together, I was trying to think of how I can try and make it as relatable as possible, whether you're a soccer coach, whether you're involved in basketball, whether you're an individual sport. So it was kind of a neat challenge, because I'm used to talking to soccer coaches who live my reality or who have been in positions that I've been in before. So yeah, it's going to be interesting for me. So hopefully you can take something from it. Like I said at the start, I'm not an expert in any fields. So I'm not going to be able to really, I don't want to say teach you anything, but hopefully I can spark some curiosity about the way we do things at Soccer Nova Scotia. And maybe there's some cool things that you can take away from it and maybe apply to your environments or your realities. So as Kirsty said at the start, I work for Soccer Nova Scotia. My role now is talent development, which in a nutshell basically means I take care of working with, amongst other things, I take care of working with clubs and creating resources, particularly around players aged 13 and above, predominantly 13 to 17, 18 in the youth sphere. But as you'll know, if you're involved in sport in any capacity, you're not just a coach, you're an administrator, you're a taxi driver from time to time, you're a travel agent, you do all those things. So hopefully there's something in here that you can take away from this. So as this kind of presentation is about knowing your audience, I figured you should learn a little bit about me. Obviously, from my accent, you can probably tell I'm not from Canada originally. I grew up in the UK. I've been here for 13 years now. I just applied for my citizenship 2 weeks ago, so hopefully that comes within the next, it says a year, so hopefully it comes within a year. But just a little bit about me. So going left to right on the screen, that's me when I was about 10 or 11, maybe 12, playing soccer. Soccer was always my first sport. That's what I did. It's kind of, if you grow up in England, that is the majority of people's first sport. The second picture is me at high school. I was actually playing rugby. I never played soccer at school. I always played rugby, and that picture was taken in New Zealand. So I was fortunate to do a bit of traveling, playing sports. The third picture was at university in England. I did a year of university at Loughborough. If anyone knows it, it's a fantastic school with, particularly in regards to sport, a lot of Olympic athletes will go there, and it has a lot of training centres. So a lot of national teams will hold their training camps and stuff there. And while I was at Loughborough, I had the opportunity to do a year abroad, which took me to Acadia University here in Nova Scotia. So originally the plan was to come to Acadia for 1 year, experience a different reality, a different culture, so to speak, and then go home, finish my degree, and live a life in England. But obviously that was 13 years ago, and I'm still here. So 1 year turned into 3 years, and then I graduated, moved to Halifax, settled down here, had a family, and yeah, I'm still here, working for Soccer Nova Scotia. But I think as just going through my journey a little bit, a key part of my life has been playing sports, predominantly soccer, but a lot of sports. And if I look back at the people that I'm still in touch with from university or from high school or from when I was a kid, it's pretty much everyone that I played sports with, or the people I'm still in touch with I played sports with. So sports isn't just about the 90 minutes when you're on the field, or the 80 minutes, or however the length of the game is. Sports is so much more than that, socially and emotionally. And particularly at this time, I'm sure there's a lot of kids out there missing their friends because they can't go and play on the field with them. So I think it's important just to remember that, or to preface what I'm saying, is that yes, I do coach, I am a coach, and I deal with players, but ultimately we deal with people. So whether you're working with 4-year-olds or whether you're working with adults, you're working with people. So it's imperative to know your audience, essentially, which I don't today. So hopefully I can learn, I can teach a little bit, or spread a little bit of that, of how we go about it. So as I said, I've settled down now. That's my fiance and my daughter, and I work for Scotia. I think prior to my role at Talent Development, I also worked in the grassroots, was my title. So I have a little bit of experience working with the younger ages as well as the older ages. And I really encourage anyone who coaches to experience that, because it's such a different reality dealing with a 4-year-old kid versus a 16-year-old. And a lot of people get into coaching thinking they want to be this high-level coach, or they only want to work with a certain type of player or certain levels. But really, if you want to better the sport and you want to better yourself, you might find that, for example, you're better suited to coaching 12-year-olds than 15-year-olds. It's just some of the best coaches and some of the most influential coaches that I've dealt with or worked with have been the ones at the younger age groups, because they just really know how to talk to young kids. They really understand how to get through to them. So that's enough about me, and I'll give you a little bit of context and a little bit of background on Soccer Nova Scotia. So these are our organisational values. If you're familiar with Soccer Nova Scotia, or if you're familiar with our facility, they're plastered everywhere. These are our values, and this allows us, in whatever we're doing, whether we're a coach, an administrator, whether we're designing programs, this is what it comes back to. So are we being player-centered? Are we being inclusive? Are we being innovative? Are we acting with integrity? So I think it's really important that for you as a coach, or for you as someone who works within an organization, to find an organization that has the same values as you. And if you do that, then you're going to have a lot easier time when you want to implement programs, or when you want to try things out. Because if you're at odds with the organization that you're working within, then ultimately there's going to be conflict, which you want to get away from. So the title of this kind of presentation is Fun and Competition, Knowing Your Audience. So it's an interesting one for me, because in the soccer world particularly, there's a lot of conversation at the youth level about are we playing to win, or are we playing to develop players? Because they always, for whatever reason, seem to be presented as opposed. So the idea of fun and competition kind of takes that as well a little, some of the times. Like I've read some things about deliberate training, and we'll get into that in a minute, how it can't be fun, or it's inherently not fun. So for me, looking at the idea of fun and competition is, for me as a coach, it's just two key principles that I incorporate into every training session. If you're working with kids, if you're working with adults, if you're working with the top level players at an age group, or whether you're working with purely recreational kids, they want to have fun, and they they want to be competitive. They want to compete. That's something that I've learned and something that I hold within my coaching. And so, yeah, can we provide a fun environment, and can we make it competitive? And we'll look at the different means of competition as we get into it and what we do at Soccer Nova Scotia. So I just alluded to the idea of deliberate practice, and this is what kind of brought me to the realization that every training session should be fun. Because I read this book, as you can see on the left-hand side, Talent is Overrated. Just an interesting one on this. The book I have actually has a quote on the cover from Donald Trump. And when you go and look for all the images now, they only put the books without the quote from Trump on it. So anyway, I thought that was interesting when I was looking for a picture of it. But what they're saying is basically Dr. Anders Ericsson is one of the people that built on the 1,000 hours rule, 10,000 hours, sorry. Gladwell popularized it in his book as well, speaking about 10,000 hours equals mastery in a subject, which I think has generally been debunked now. What Ericsson came back with is that it's not 10,000 hours, it's 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. So it's an activity designed specifically to improve performance, often with a teacher's help, so the coach's help, and feedback are continuously available, highly demanding mentally, whether it's purely intellectual or heavily physical, such as sports, and it isn't much fun. So when I read that, it was kind of, I was agreeing with it the whole way. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. It makes sense. If you know what you've got to work on, you've got to work on that. And then I got to the fact that it isn't much fun. And that just didn't sit well with me, if I'm being honest. I think particularly in my role, where I work with kids aged 13 to 16, I think if it's not fun, then we're doing a massive disservice to the players. So it kind of led me to dig into this a little bit more. Now, I understand that this book is about what really separates world-class performers and everyone else. I'm not dealing with world-class performers. I'm dealing with kids who are on a journey to try and get to that stage. So maybe when they kick on from our environment into a better environment and get to that top level, maybe it isn't fun, but I don't know anyone who does anything for a sustained period of time if it's not fun. So for me, the idea of every practice that I run and every session that I design, I look at it and I think, if I wouldn't want to do this as a player, then we're not doing it. So would I want to do it? If the answer is yes, then that's a starting point for me. And from that, whether it's fun. So as I've kind of alluded to a little bit, my aim in my specific role, or our aim as an organization, is to inspire kids to love the sport of soccer, to play for the entirety of their life, and to reach the highest level which they are capable and that they want to play at. Understanding that not everyone can be a professional athlete, but if they've got the ability and they've got the desire, that's what we want to do. We want to help get them there. And so for me, in that journey of trying to hit those three sweet spots, inspiring the love of sport, play forever, and reach the level that they're capable of, for me, it was a no-brainer that it has to be fun and it has to be challenging. So can we challenge them and provide that appropriate competition at each stage of their development, and what that looks like for different players and different audiences. So for me, I deal with kids, and I know that this might be a little bit different for some people, but I looked at the idea as, what is fun? What's fun for kids? What's fun for people in general? Now, replace Fortnite with Call of Duty, or even, what's the game on your Candy Crush on your phones? Games are addictive. People play them because they're fun. So to a kid, this is what's fun. So if we look at the just creative games, building stuff using Lego. I think that's the what's it called from Star Wars? Not the Death Star, the other thing. I'll remember it in a bit. I'll come back to it. Being creative on drawing painting, making stuff, playing in a ball pit, just being carefree. That's what's fun for kids. So when we looked at that as an organization, thought, okay, this is what the enterprise. When we looked at this and thought, Millennium Falcon, that's the one. Thanks, Daniel. That's what I was trying to think of. Yeah. So when we were looking at what do these kids find fun, we were like, these are some kind of things that right now is fun for kids. So we looked at it as how can we apply these principles within our training environment? So why do they like Fortnite? Because there's problem solving. You can, if you want to play on your own, you can play on your own. If you want to work as part of a team, you can work as part of a team. The floor is lava. It's just lightheartedness. And I'm sure you've all seen videos on social media of adults playing it and falling over signs and in hedges and stuff like that. But creativity, individuality, problem solving, this is what kids want. This is what we all want, essentially. And whether you're dealing with a 4-year-old or a 17-year-old, I guarantee if you said to them, the floor is lava at a practice, they would run and find the nearest thing to run away from, to jump on, because it's fun. So how can we as coaches, how can we as facilitators of the environment create an environment that mimics these kind of principles of being challenging, of being fun, of solving problems, of being creative? Because what we don't want to do, as particularly in my sport, is we don't want to pigeonhole players into a certain role. If you've got a creative player, you want to nurture that, because those are the ones that are rare. So we just kind of looked at that and thought, how do we do this? So that's what we got to in terms of fun. That's what we want to see. So what about competition? Now this is an interesting one, because competition itself is neutral. It's neither good nor bad. But a quote from this book basically says that when it's used for good, it can be a positive experience for the athletes, for the players. However, when people such as administrators, coaches, parents lose perspective and fail to put the welfare of the child or the athlete first, the competition can be negative. And I'm sure within any sport on here, there's instances where, or even in your own experiences, in your past lives as athletes, where you've had a coach who's put you before, or put the team, or put the process before winning, and you felt from that. And I'm sure that we've all dealt with people who have put the outcome of an individual result first, and absolutely destroyed some young kids on the way by not giving them the right playing time, or in soccer, maybe substituting them after a mistake. So it's understanding what is competition and how can we use that for a positive, not a negative. So how can we use a competition, because at the end of the day, sport is competitive. How can we use competition to enhance and make the experience of the players and the athletes and the children, the people we're working with, as good as possible? So for what is competition? So for us in soccer, it's things that are often out of our control. If you work at a club environment, so things such as leagues, tournaments, provincial, national championships. So a lot of that, as coaches, we won't have control over. I'm fortunate that I'm in a position where I work for the provincial sport organisation, that we do have some kind of overview and control over the way our leagues function. And we'll get into that in a little bit about some of the things we've done. But then there's informal competition. So, and this is what can be fully in our control, or in our control to a much greater extent. So club programming, if you work in a club, how do you set up competition internally where you're not beheld to rules of, say, the provincial sport organisation or the national sport organisation? Can you come up with creative programming that provides competition that's relevant to your players, to your athletes? In your training environment, can you create that culture? Can you create a competitive environment so that every training session or every time they step on the field or on the court, the players know that they're going to have fun, but they're going to compete? and they're going to step outside their comfort zone. So a lot of the time we get tied up in the formal competition aspect of it, and we kind of think, oh, we can't do this because of league rules, we can't do this because of age restrictions. Whereas what we can look at is look within ourselves and within our own organization and say, what can we do? What can we do internally to make this, to create competition? So as I said, traditional competition is the fundamental notion is that it's you against someone else. You're trying to win. Whether it's a game of soccer, you've got two teams trying to beat each other. If it's tennis, you've got two players trying to beat each other. If it's gymnastics, you're trying to score a higher score than everyone else. That's what competition is. You're trying to you're trying to win. You're trying to beat an opponent in order to win. So we kind of looked at that and said, right, that's there. That exists. We can't deny the fact that if you're involved in sports, at the end of the day, you're competing to try and win. So how can we redefine that in a way that makes sense, that can make us better from it? So on the screen now, if you know anything about soccer, that's Messi and Ronaldo on the left, arguably the two best players of all time. Definitely the two best players over the past 10 years or so. And then on the right-hand side, you've got Federer and Nadal, who obviously Djokovic is on the scene now, and there's been a Murray broken a little bit, but consistently over the last 15 years, they've been the best two players in the world by far. So we looked at competition and said, right, there's an aspect to it where, yes, you're trying to be better than someone else, you're trying to win. But how can we use that to our advantage? Because I would argue that Messi and Ronaldo both come in around at the same time, and Federer and Nadal and now Djokovic has helped push each other to the next level. Without Ronaldo, would Messi be as revered as he is right now? Would Federer and Nadal, would they have reached the heights that they've reached without each other, continually pushing each other to be better? So we looked at it and thought, how can we switch the mindset systemically rather, as a province? How can we switch it from us versus them to us and them? So how can we use our opponent to help make us better? So we're not trying to beat them and humiliate them to prove that we're the best. We're trying to use them to test us to make us better. And now, how can we do that? And it's not easy, but it's if we can create that mindset, particularly within teams. And I know that there's some sports where you're on a team, but you also compete against each other. So in soccer, for example, it might be two players who play the same position, both vying for that starting spot. So if you've got two goalkeepers and you can only ever play one of them, can you create that rivalry that each player is pushing the other so they can be as good as they can be? So we wanted to really redefine what competition was for us. So as I said earlier, I'm fortunate that I work for the provincial sport organisation, and we actually 2 years ago now took control of our leagues. It was outsourced. We took control of it, and it came under our banner. And so we did a review of what was appropriate, what wasn't appropriate. And one of the things we were able to implement is this thing called skill centres. Now, if you're involved in soccer, you might know it. If you're involved in a different sport, you may not. But basically, what used to happen in soccer at the ages of 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 is you'd have an A team, a B team, and then kids that played in the house league. And typically what happened is the A team got the best coaches, they got the best training times, the best players, and then you had the B team that got the next best, and then you had the C team that got the next best, and then you had a group of players that basically got neglected. So what we saw is that the A team got better, and the B teams and the players behind that didn't. And we were getting to a stage where at the age of 14, 15, we just didn't have any players left. Because at the age of 9, 10, we've said to a kid, yeah, you're not going to be in the A team, you're going to be in the B team, and they've got disillusioned with the sport. And some of the kids from the A team also played hockey and played basketball and took that as their their first choice sport, so they went and played that. Then all of a sudden, from our 10 A-team players that we had at U10, by the time we get to U15, we've only got 5 of them left, and we don't have enough at the older age groups to sustain good, appropriate competition for everyone, because we just weren't retaining the players. So what we did is we removed tryouts. So there's a lot of skill centers. I could speak about it for an hour on here, but what we looked at is that basically it's available to all if the club has the capacity to run it. So just say, for example, the club has 5 coaches. There has to be a 10-to-1 ratio for coaches to players to coaches. That club has the ability to have 50 players. That's open to everyone. Now you can invite up to 50% of those players, because obviously there's some players that you may want. But the idea behind it is that all players in the program in the skill center, regardless of whether you're at the age of 9 or 10, whether you're an all-star or whether you're the first year playing the sport, you get access to the same kind of training. You get access to the same coaches. You get access to the same training times. Because we don't know at the age of 9, 10, 11, 12, who's going to be the best player at the age of 16. So we need to keep the pool as big as possible for as long as possible. We also know that at the age of 10, me, for example, I didn't start playing soccer until the age of 10. Formally, I played in the streets and I played with my friends, but I never played on a team until the age of 10. There may be some kids joining our programs in soccer at the age of 10 who have never kicked the ball before. There may also be in that same group a kid that's been playing with his older brother since the age of 3, 4. So although both kids are 10, one kid has been playing in a semi-formal environment for 6 years and one never has. It stands to reason that kid with 6 years more experience is going to be better in that moment in time. But the reality is that if we have that kid who's just started playing and he wants to play and he wants to improve, if we don't give him the availability to the best coaching or the best possible environment, he's never going to reach that stage. That player's never going to reach that stage. So we have to look at it more holistically, rather than right now, who's the best player right now? Look, how can we keep as many players playing the sport, and who may be the best player in 5, 10, 15 years time? Because often it's not the best players at the age of 10 that are the best players at the age of 12 that are the best players at the age of 14. So that's one of the things with skill centers. The fluid game rosters is another big thing. It means that we can move players week to week. Now, it's not advised to do it week to week because it becomes really hard to administer. But what it means is that if you're playing a particularly strong team one weekend, you've got the ability to pull players. If you've got 3 teams within your club, you've got the ability to pull players from team to team to make it a more competitive game. If you're playing what you know is a weaker team, you'd be able to move players around again so that it's a, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, competitive game. Sorry, competition. Yeah, because whether you're on the winning team or whether you're on the losing team of a blowout, it's not fun for anyone. Kids would much rather play in a game and win with a last-minute shot than win by 50 points or win by 10 goals. So we try and do as much as we can to try and allow for that to happen. And there's other criteria and other resources that we bring in. There's also blocks, and my colleague Zach, who now looks after grassroots, looks after this. But it might be that we might say to for weeks 1, 2, 3, we want you to build your team by height. So all the tall kids play against each other from one club against all the tall kids from another club. And then you get all the small kids from one club playing against all the small kids from another club. And what that helps to do is it helps to really take the physical aspect out of it at that age where they've not reached maturity. And it allows for more balanced games. We don't see good young players who are just physically small getting overrun and beat up just because they're small. We see them having success and we see them enjoying the game. So that's something that's really helped us. We've also split teams up by date of birth. So For example, if you've got 4 teams in your club, you might have sort them by oldest to youngest that way. And again, it's similar to the height. You have kids that are physically more mature playing against more mature kids. And sometimes it's just balanced, where it's just strong kid, a beginner to the sport, and we just make it work. Because ultimately, we've got to give the game back to the kids. At the age of 11, I've never seen a kid at the age of 9, 10, 11 who I've looked at and been like, yeah, he's going to be a world-class player. We don't know. So if we're looking back at our aim, which is to get kids to love the sport, which is to play for as long as they can, to reach the level that they want to reach, we need to keep them engaged. And this is something that's really helped us in terms of the competition structure. Now, I know that that's not a reality at all the clubs and for all the organizations, but if you're a big enough club, this is something you might be able to do internally. So then on to internal competition. So as I spoke about earlier, one of the things that is a non-negotiable for me is to make every activity we do in a training session competitive. So we looked at how can we do that. So there's kind of 4 ways we determine it. So it's me versus me, where you're competing against yourself. Me versus you, when you're competing against someone else or a group of people. Us versus us, which is more team orientated, or groups of players, and then us versus them. And this in the next slide will just show you a little bit more what that means. So when we're doing activities, me versus me, it could be you. Let's use soccer as an example because that's what I'm well versed in. But a juggling record, how many times can you juggle? Okay, you've done that. All right, next time, can you beat that personal record? So if you're doing the activity, you're really setting that goal for yourself to beat it next time and challenge yourself. We're not just juggling for the sake of juggling. It's juggling with the intent to improve. And same, me versus me could be against time. Can you do X amount of juggles in a minute? Can you dribble here to there? How many times can you dribble here to there in 30 seconds? Okay, awesome. Can you beat that next time around? So it's that kind of idea. The next thing is me v you, and that again could be time tasks. So it might be you got 30 seconds to do an activity. What's your score? I'm against Kirsty. Who can get the most in 30 seconds? Okay, awesome. And then us versus them could be with could be a lot of things. But basically it's cooperative competition, bringing a teammate into play. It could be something like how many passes can you two make in 30 seconds? It could be who can do the most in 30 seconds. It could be who can do them in the quickest time. So it could be task defined, it can be time defined. And then us versus us is teams against teams. And then so a collective group. Kirsty and I are on a team together. We've done 30 juggles between us. Now we've got to try and beat our own records that we set previously. So it's collaboration, and trying to beat a previously established record that we've made. So every one of our activities that we do comes back to one of these, and so that we're trying to push the kids. Now in a team environment, it's more likely to be a kind of us versus them, me versus you situation, based on our philosophy. But there's no reason that when we get into kind of individual techniques or individual skills, that's when the me versus me really comes into it. And as we recover from COVID, when there's social distancing in place, that's going to be a really big one for us, because we're not going to be able to straight away go and compete against other teams or go and compete 1v1 against another player. So we're going to have to be really creative in the way we develop programs and design programs. This is something that we've done within our program. So if you look there, you can see, I'll just give you a bit of context before I get into this. I coach in the Excel program, which means I work with players every day, age 13 to 16 boys. So we'll train Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, typically play a game on the weekend. That's the way it was supposed to work this summer. The world had different plans. But anyway, we looked at it and said, all right, how can we create competition and what can we put on the line? Because a lot of the times, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier, when we look at competition, one of the things we do is like losing team does a punishment, I don't know, suicide runs, 10 push-ups, 10 sit-ups. I try and frame it differently so that it's a positive. So rather than a punishment for losing, it's a reward for winning. I think, and I've found personally that that's something that really brings the best out of players. So we had a game one weekend, and so we had a conversation with the players, and it's like, let's put something on the line. We're going to have a little competition. What do you want to put on the line? And for us, we're a team sport. We said, the players said, we want to put playing time on the line. Okay, we want it. So we came up between us as a group with a process that we would play a game every day, Monday to Friday. And at the end of the week, the person who had scored the most or had done the best would be guaranteed 90 minutes, be guaranteed a full game that weekend. All right. So what we did, we've got 18 players. We put all their names on a board. We played a 9v9 game. At the end of that game, just a 10-minute game. It wasn't a full game. It was just the last 10 minutes of practice. 9v9 game. If you lose, or basically a different way of framing it, if you win, your name stays on the board for tomorrow. So after Monday's session, it looked more like that, if you can see that. All right. So after Monday's session, 9 of the players had won the previous day, 9 of the players had lost. So that means we had 9 players left. So of those 9 players who were still in white, I split them up into 2 different teams. Everyone played, but we just made sure that those players were on different teams, and we played again. So after Tuesday's game, it looked like that. We had 4 players that had won 2 days in a row. Everyone else had lost one of the games. After Wednesday's game, I made sure that those 4 players were on different teams, and we were left with 2 players after Thursday. So here's where we had a conversation about it as the players, and we said, right, we have 2 players left. We can put them on the same team. We can put them on different teams and guarantee that one person is going to play a full game this weekend because one team will win. Or we can put them both on the same team. If they both win, they both play a full game. If that team loses, then it's up for grabs. No one's guaranteed a full game. So the players unanimously decided they wanted both players to be on the same team. And what happened was they lost, and no one was guaranteed a full game. But what it did that week in those games was the most competitive I've ever seen our boys in a training session. Because there was something on the line, a positive reinforcement to have something on the line. And the determination for the players to win, so that they got the 90 minutes playing time at the weekend, and the determination of the other team to beat them so that it increased their chances of playing, was like nothing I'd ever experienced before as a coach. So it was really cool. So if you've got the ability to do something like that, obviously I train 5 times a week. I've got that luxury, but it could also be just 5 games within a training session, 5-minute games, and split it up that way. But like when you're looking to provide competition for players, that was one way we found worked really well for us as a group, where they would push themselves, and for that 10 minutes, it was just pure competition, and that carries out into the game. So that's one way we did it. Another way, our girls program, I've used the same boys' names because it was easier than copy and pasting and writing all the girls' names. They do it in a slightly different way. So they have they'll have a once a week competition, and what they do is they'll basically play 3v3, 4v4 games, 3, 4, 5-minute games, whatever it is. At the end of each game, if you win, you get 3 points. If you lose, you get 0 points. If you tie, you get 1. And each player keeps their personal score. So after week 1, you can see here that Youssef F was the highest scorer. He'd won 13 points. His team had won 13, which isn't actually possible. There'd be more than 13. But then we split the teams up, and then in week 2, and what you'll see and what the girls have typically seen is that the players that after week 1, they see that they didn't score particularly well, the next week their score will rocket because they want to win. They don't want to be the person on that list whose number's at the bottom. And on the flip side, the people at the top, they want to stay there. So it really drives the competition without it being, without putting punishments on the line. It's pride for the players. There's a real sense of pride in them they wanted to be the number 1 player. They wanted to be at the top of the list, and they definitely didn't want to be the bottom with the lowest score. So it was just a different way that we were able to do it internally, where we weren't held to any kind of rules. We were able to make the rules. We were able to make the teams and that kind of stuff. And it's just another way for us in terms of embedding culture within a competitive culture within the training environment, which is sometimes the hardest thing to do. Now, I touched on this a little bit in the way we set up our activities before, but one of the things we're big on is, as an organization, is transformational coaching. Now, you might have heard of this, you might not have. Again, I'm not an expert, so if this is something that piques your interest, I really encourage you to look into it further. There's Dr. Jennifer Turnage at Queen's University, who kind of came and spoke to us about this. And it looks at 4 I's. So as a coach, can you demonstrate these 4 I's? So individualized influence on the top left is basically practicing what you're preaching. So as a coach, can you be that positive role model? If you're asking players to show up 5 minutes early for practice and you're strolling up on the hour, then you're not practicing what you're preaching. You're not showing that. Can you really live the standards that you want your players to exhibit? Inspirational motivation, and a lot of that comes down to the way you interact with your players. So rather than telling them that they're not good enough or something like that, it's giving them that belief that they can do better. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that there's some players I work with. I know that if I say to some players after a poor play that, come on, that's not good enough, that will get them going and improve them. But I also know that if I said that to a different player, they would go into their shell and that could destroy them for the whole game. So some players might need come on, you're better than that. Other players might need, you've got this, come on, don't worry about it, you've got this. So, and that's where the individualized consideration comes into it. So down the bottom right, a person-centered approach. Can you understand the individual that you're working with, or the individuals you're working with? Even within a team sport, I've got 18 players in the program, 18 boys in the program, 18 different personalities. So there's some things I have to do with some that you wouldn't do with others. And it can be a difficult thing to juggle, especially when you're trying to meet set standards. So I think it's important as a coach that you lay your standards out at the front, have the players agree and even co-create that. And then if they're part of the building the standards process, then they're way likely to adhere to it, way more likely to adhere to it as it goes on. And that intellectual stimulation there, involving the players in the coaching process. So I gave an example just a minute ago where I said, like, what do we want to put on the line? We allowed the players to choose the reward for winning all those games. And a lot of the times we'll ask them, okay, we'll set up an activity, okay, 2 teams against each other. What do we want the rules to be? Well, we want to play to an end zone. And if they I know you can't just hand over the keys to the castle to the players all the time, but if there's areas where you can involve them in the process, okay, if we're playing a game, if we're doing a shooting drill, for example, how many goals are we going to score? What's our target? Allow them to set that. Because as a coach, you might not agree with it. You might think you're never going to get that, or you might think you're making it easy for yourself. And that's where conversation comes into it. But if you can involve the players in that process, then they're way more likely to understand, 1, what you're trying to achieve, and 2, what the capabilities or what's required to get there in the next step. If I say to them, I expect you to score 10 goals, and then they score 3, then all of a sudden they're like, oh God, coach is going to be mad at us. Whereas if they set 10 and they only hit 3, we can go back to them and say, all right, maybe 10 was a bit over over ambitious, want to redefine it. And most of the time I'll go, yeah, let's go for 5. Some of them might go, no, we can get 10. And then that's when you'll see the conversation with players be like, man, what are you talking about? We just got 3. Come on, let's go for 5. But just having that level of competition and having that buy-in from the players is really helped for us in our environment. And I think that's something that transcends sports. So whether it's soccer, whether it's a different sport, I think that can be brought in. There's definitely a big thing in leadership now as well. There's a lot of research into it in leadership for CEOs or executive directors at companies. There's a lot of transformational leadership, material out there as well. So that's kind of what we look at. So for us as soccer, our principles of the training session is, and this is going to be impacted severely by COVID and the return to play policy, but I can give a quick overview about it because it ties in nicely. It ties in nicely with what we spoke about so far. So for us, a representative learning design. So does training look like the game? Does it feel like the game in some capacity? Because as kids that register for soccer, they want to play soccer. So even though we might be doing certain drills or certain activities, can we make it as soccer-like as possible? And that means keeping perception and action coupled. So that means a player sees something, he acts because of it. It's not just, you're going to pass there because I'm the coach and I said you should pass there. It's okay. What are you perceiving? Can you act based on that? An external focus of attention, again, that it ties in. So we don't want players to think about where their foot is when they kick the ball. Because if a player is only ever looking at their feet, they're going to miss what else is going on in front of them. And the ball is never going to be in the same place twice in a game. So what we're looking at for external focus of attention, and I know there's a lot of conversation in the coaching world and a lot of back and forth is which is the right way to coach, which is the right way to do things. Honestly, I don't think there's any correct answer. But this is something that I personally believe in and we as an organization believe in. That if you're focused on yourself, you're going to miss what's going on big picture around you. Now, in some sports, it is maybe a target sport like archery. You're focusing on, well, I don't want to speak for any archery coaches, but you're hitting a target that doesn't move. You're the same distance away from a target that doesn't move. Obviously, wind could be a factor, but generally speaking, it's a closed environment. Everything's the same every time you take it. You step up to take your shot. In soccer, that we've got 22 players that continuously move, who make decisions independent of each other. So creating that environment where that happens is the only way that we can really teach kids to, in my opinion, is to teach kids how to look for other things rather than be focused on the ball or get tunnel vision when you're on the ball. Repetition without repetition. So basically what that means is if, for example, we want to work on dribbling today, great. How can we get them to dribble a lot of the times, but without it being tedious or without doing the same thing for 20 minutes? Can you create a session? Can you create an activity where the outcome is going to be a high amount of touches on the ball, dribbling, but they're not just standing there dribbling through cones? Are they going to be able to make decisions? Are they going to move the ball in different ways with different feet, with different parts of their feet based on what they see in front of them? And then finally creating the problem, not the solution, using constraints. And I'll get into that a little bit because a lot of the times, and certainly for me when I started coaching, it was like, we're going to do a passing drill where you pass to you, you're going to turn and pass it out there. And then you're going to cross it in and great. And then that never happens in the game, right? So we knew we wanted to get to a point where we wanted certain things to happen. It's just like, how can we allow players to get there on their own? So I'm not going to tell you how to get there. We set the problem, or we set the aim. So your aim is to get the ball into this target. How you get it there is up to you. You figure it out. I'm not going to tell you to do it because that might not be the right option at the right time. Which kind of speaks a little bit about ecological dynamics. And again, I'm not an expert in this. It's something that I just that I've learned about and something that I've taken into coaching. So basically, it looks at three different things. It looks at the task, the environment, and the individual. So those are the three factors that will ultimately determine how a person acts at any given time. What the task is, so what you're trying to achieve, the individual themselves, and the environment. So if you change one of those things, then the movement solution that you get will be altered, essentially. So I know that might be a bit confusing to someone who hasn't done any reading on it, but hopefully this will make it a little bit more simple as we go through. So what we look at is there's three pillars, there's three factors: the task, the environment, the individual, and the constraints on them will change. So none of them are fixed. So you can change a task. The environment may change based on whether in soccer, for example, you're playing on turf, whether you're playing on grass, whether it's a hot day, whether it's raining. That will impact a player's decision whether they're going to take a shot or whether they're going to do a certain run. And then the individual themselves, as you know, working with people, some people are absolute machines and can run the 100 meters in 10 seconds. And then people like myself who run it a lot slower. So what one person would choose to do in a situation based on their physical capabilities is very different to how another may act. So what we want to look at, the personal constraints are unique to the individual. So their height, their weight, their speed, could even be their motivation levels. The key thing is that it's all different for different players. If you look at the picture of those two kids, I'm sure one's going to have a lot more success trying to run by players than the other. Right? So we can't say to the little kid, every time you get the ball, you've got to try and outrun the big kid, because it's just not going to work. So how does that live within a session? We want to try and create environments where we give them the problems and let them solve it out. So if we said to these two players in the picture, for example, our task is to get the ball from A to B. The big kid might run with it as fast as he can. The little kid might pass it. One's not right, one's not wrong. It's just based on their personal constraints, such as their strength and their height. One has chosen to do it one way, one has chosen to do it a different way. So taking that into consideration. Just a couple of examples, if there's any rugby coaches out there, that's Brian Habana on the far left and Jonah Lomu. Both world-class international rugby players, both arguably the best in the world when they were playing. Brian Habana is an absolute whippet and can run the 100 meters in less than 10 seconds. And Jonah Lomu, as you can see by the size of his thighs, is an absolute tank. So where one will try and outrun you, the other one's more than happy to run straight through you. And then same on the right-hand side there, looking at Christine Sinclair and Alex Morgan. Two very different kind of players, both world-class strikers for their respective nations, would do things very differently just based on their physiological things. Alex Morgan is much more of a dribbler, whereas Christine Sinclair is much more of a target player. One's not better than the other. Well, I'm going to say Sinclair's better because she's Canadian and Morgan's from the States, but two different players that have found ways based on their personal constraints. The environment, not much you can do about this really, but if you're an outdoor sport, the humidity will have a factor. You're going to run significantly less when it's 35 degrees out versus a regular day. If it's super windy, there's a lot bigger chance that you're going to keep your passes on the ground than in the air. You'll probably shoot higher just to try and catch the keeper out, the different surfaces. But just understanding that these have an effect on the way that the player perceives what they're going to do. It's just understanding that. Again, looking at tennis, and I'll go back to Nadal, the environment, Nadal has been one of the most dominant players. On the left is Roland Garros, the French Open, which Nadal's won 12 times. On the right is the Australian Open, which is a hard court, and he's only won it once. So he's the exact same player in both environments, but the surface of one lends lends itself a lot better to Nadal's game than the other. So understanding that Nadal is a world-class tennis player has a lot better time playing on one surface than another, and that impacts the way he plays. And then the task, and this is where the coach really comes into play in the way we design sessions. So this is something we have full control over. So for us in soccer, it's how many players are we going to use? What are the rules? What's the size? Where's the starting position? How do we score? Are we trying to score into a goal? Are we trying to pass into a player? Are there zones that players are locked into? All these things will impact the way a player acts at any time during a session. So if, for example, you know that you've got to pass it to a player, it's a very different action than if you're going to shoot a ball. And by manipulating one of these constraints or multiple of these constraints, you can get different outputs from your players. So if you wanted to, you could have an exercise where the emphasis is passing, and you're trying to, as a team, you're trying to pass to a target player. You can change that very quickly to a dribbling exercise by removing the target player. And now all of a sudden you have to score by dribbling over the end zone. So just by changing a constraint, you can change the whole dynamic of how the players react or how the players act. So it's important as coaches to understand these constraints that we put in place. So what we've really asked coaches to do in our environment and at the club level is understand, if you're putting a rule into an activity, why is it there? What is that rule? How is that rule going to impact a player's behavior? And is it going to impact the player's behavior in a way that you want? So do you want them to dribble all the time, or do you want them to pass? You can manipulate the task. You can manipulate the constraints to try and get that out. And one of the things that we say all the time is don't over constrain. So don't just put rules in for the sake of it. All right, the players will figure it out. So that's how we go about doing it. This is really the last slide, because I know I've spoke a lot and I've thrown a lot of information at people. But one of the things we deal with is affordances. And basically it's a fancy way of saying what the environment offers to the individual. So we need to build the opportunity for affordances within a training environment. So an example that I've used here, and I've tried to make it as simple as possible so that people can understand. If there's a gap between two defenders, one attacker may dribble through that big kid might dribble through based on his speed and his size. Another player, a small technical kid, might pass through it. The key factor for us is designing the affordance, not prescribing the action, because again, we don't want to prescribe how players play. We want them to figure it out. But a key part in this is that, for example, within our environment, it's a dynamic environment. So a player moves. If a player moves, the gap may not exist anymore. So we need to design sessions where players are acting and perceiving based on what they see. So if the gap's there, then all of a sudden the option to dribble through or pass through is no longer there. So we need to design sessions that allow for affordances and that are game realistic, so that it's not prescribed how a player acts every single time they step on the field. Yeah, and I guess that's it from me. So Kirsty, if you're still around, I don't know if you want to unmute people, and if anyone has any questions, wants to ask anything about anything I've said, has any comments, I'm happy for feedback, because honestly, learning from other sports and the NCCP modules that I've done has been one of the richest things for me, because a lot of the time I deal with soccer coaches and we all have the same thoughts and same opinions, and there's a lot of sports out there that do things differently that we can adapt and steal and borrow from. So I don't know, if anyone has any questions, feel free to shout at me or chuck them in the box, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Matt. And I echo what you said about the NCCP course. I think I can't remember what course it was where we first met, and that's when I first heard about the Skills Center and how you guys don't really do tryouts for the ages under 11. So I think that's so awesome. And there's a few coaches who thought the same as well in the chat box. So yeah, if you guys have any questions about that or anything else that Matt had to present to us today, please feel free to use the chat box or to speak up through your microphone.
Hi, Matt. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, so it was great session. I enjoyed it. I liked your slides and stuff. Like it was very in a, what do you call it? It's not like upside down, but it's in the like same and like, you know, universal, same tone and same like going through the way. I can understand everything you said. But my question was, Matt, like, I see some people still playing soccer outside in Ontario here, but they don't know how to train well their kids. So any suggestions for them? Like, you know, they have cones and every stuff.
Yeah, well, right now I'd say stick to public health guidelines as a starting point.
Yeah.
No, I mean, one of like a lot of the things that I've said today, a lot of the things we preach is kind of, we're saying in a training session, try not to do that isolated stuff where it's just you and the ball, because that's a time when you can really take advantage of the fact that you've got teammates and kind of stuff like that. So it's interesting now that we're in this physical distancing thing, that we're going to be back into that world where it's going to be more so the individual player with an individual ball. So what I hope can come out of this is the fact that kids will learn that they can play on their own with the ball in their own. So for me, what I would say, any tips is just get the kids to, and they're obviously depending on the age and stage of the kid, get them to fall in love with the ball. Just enjoy having it. One of the things we say is own the ball before you share the ball. So for the young kids, it's about being familiar with it, setting those tasks. So can you beat your previous juggling record? Can you dribble around, or can you dribble from A to B as many times as possible in 30 seconds? Set tasks and try and beat them. Just enjoy having the ball at your feet, because I think it's something that not just Canada, but North America in general, and even England in the past, it was very, very robotic. Very robotic, whereas we want to encourage players to love playing and do things their own way. So hopefully that helps. But just any co-creation from the kids. They want to do something that's fun. They want to do something that's challenging. Is my experience. So that's what I would say: fun, challenging drills, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking to going to England once, like after this one is done, after COVID is finished, I'll come to Nova Scotia. Christy knows I'll come there and meet everyone. And then afterwards, I'll go to England to meet, maybe I get a chance to meet Lampard.
That'd be nice. That would be nice.
Yeah.
I'm a Chelsea supporter, so yeah, Lampard would be great. Just a question there on the chat from Wayne. When the transition happened from the non-ABC format, what was implemented to increase acceptance from the shareholders? Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, it's a changing culture. It's a change in the system. It was really difficult. We were super fortunate that our biggest club in the province, United DFC, based in Dartmouth here, they're a club of 2,400, and my colleague now, Zach, who I mentioned earlier, he worked for them at the time, and he really championed it there, and they were the first to implement it. And we were super fortunate that the biggest club in the province went out and said, we're doing this. This is the right thing to do. We don't believe in cutting kids at the age of 9, 10, 11, 12. They went out and did it, and they showed the rest of the province it could be done. Not without headaches. There were obviously headaches because people did it, had never done this before. But across the board, I mean, we're, I don't know where you're from, Wayne, but Nova Scotia is a pretty small, tight-knit community. All the technical leads of all the clubs know each other, and we have a relationship such that we can hold each other accountable peer-to-peer. So it was more a case of us all buying into it together and all agreeing to do it together. Listen, there's some clubs that did it better than others. There's some clubs that are still trying to figure it out. It's not easy. But yeah, it wasn't easy at all. There was backlash. But at the end of the day, if you can say to a parent or to to a person, we don't believe in cutting kids at the age of 8, 9, and 10. I don't think anyone can disagree with that, really. We believe in creating an environment where all kids that want to be there will have the opportunity to get access to good coaching. It's very hard for anyone to argue with that. And that's kind of how we went about it, is going from there. And as I said, we were super fortunate that the biggest club in the province took a lead on it. And yeah, it was hard, but we're at the stage now where it's almost becoming normal. So to go back and to create all-star teams at the age of 9, 10, people would go, what are you doing? Whereas 4 or 5 years ago, that was the norm. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question, but it basically came back to the principles of all kids have a right to play the sport, and all kids have a right to have access to the best training and the best environment possible if they want to be there.
Awesome. Okay. Any last questions? Feel free to use the chat box or speak up.
Yeah, and on the screen there now is my email and my Twitter. If you're interested in anything I said, if you want a PDF version of these slides, reach out to me. Feel free. I'll send it to whoever wants it.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'll be following up this session with an email, and I can include those slides in that and some of the references that Matt mentioned, like some of those books. And I have a couple of Jennifer Turnage articles that I can include as well. Actually, for those coaches in Nova Scotia and the Atlantic provinces, Jennifer was actually supposed to come to our Atlantic Coaches Conference in April. So hopefully we'll have her back here next April at the conference so you can learn more about transformational coaching. So it doesn't look like there's any more questions, so we'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Matt. This was great, a lot of great takeaways, and I'm sure a lot of coaches will appreciate this and all the resources you had to offer as well. So thank you again, Matt, and thank you to everyone for attending this afternoon, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.